I think I'm in. This is Ray Hing.
Hi, Ray.
Hi, Victor. Hello
How
there.
are you? Great.
Very
Yeah.
good.
I got it. Thank you very much.
By the way, where are you?
I'm in San Jose, California.
Oh,
It's
okay.
5 o'clock in the morning.
I know. I was just telling Joanne that there are people that desperately want to listen to her.
Yes,
You're one of
she's
them. You're
one
one
of
of
my
them.
favorite.
She's incredible.
I am at 200% in agreement with you.
And you're in for a major treat here. Hi, Rick.
Hello, Victor.
Hey. Well, I tell everyone, Rick and I literally go way back.
55 years.
When we were literally young.
Yeah, yes. And I'm having lunch with our friends Dan and Bob today.
Okay. Okay,
Yeah.
good.
We wish you could be with us, but you're busy today.
Well, I can join you virtually, but I
Yes.
cannot eat. Who is this? Who is this you are meeting?
Bob Fenstermacher
Oh, sure.
and Dan.
You live near Drew?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
14 minutes.
Wow. So you live in Madison?
Well, 40 minutes north. Yeah.
Okay. What's the name of the town?
Mahwah.
Oh, Mahwah. Okay.
Mahwah, New Jersey.
Okay. Good. My friend here, Steve Pei, for many years is the distinguished scientist at Bell Labs. I think Merrill Hill, right, Stephen?
Yes, in my previous life.
Yeah, in Bell Labs. For how many years there? How many years were you there?
Let me think, about less than 20 years.
Oh, well, it's 20 years. Okay, yeah, it's a good enough number.
Well, we know Bell Labs very well, don't we, Victor?
Yep. Rick and I were undergraduate classmates together at Drew University between 1964 and 68. Can you believe that? We are the very few, maybe altogether there are 4 physics majors.
Right. There were 4.
But we were taught by Bell Labs people.
Yes.
Yeah, all of them Bell Labs. We have 4 or 5 teachers who came to teach us in the evening because they have day jobs.
Yes.
They're fantastic.
Including Dr. Olam, who who also
Yeah,
worked.
well, he also works at Bell Labs. I mean, they were all fantastic physicists
Mhm.
teaching at a little small liberal arts college.
I was reading about Huawei the other day, and they were
Mhm.
talking about how amazing it is because at 2 o'clock in the morning,
Yep.
the lights are still on, and the food was delivered to the labs. That was Murray Hill 50 years
Yeah.
ago.
Mhm.
2 o'clock in the morning, you still have cars in the parking lot. Not anymore.
Well, it takes hard work to be ahead. I lived once in a hotel right next to the chemistry department of Cambridge in England. I went to for a visit, and 3 o'clock in the morning, the whole building was lit up.
Yeah.
Okay. So hello everyone. I am Shesmin, your MC for today. So thank you for joining us in today's dialogue on the China-US tech war, geopolitical and geoeconomic implications and challenges. The forum is organized by World Scientific Publishing. Now moving on to the next slide. Now for a few housekeeping notes before we start. You are most welcome to leave your camera on, but please keep the mics muted while the forum is ongoing. There'll be a Q&A session after the talk, so please feel free to post your questions in the chat at any time. After posting your question in the chat, you may be invited to unmute and read it out during the Q&A session if you are comfortable in doing so. Also, this webinar will be recorded and posted online. Moving on to the next slide. So today we are honored to welcome back Dr. Joanna Lei as our special guest. This is Dr. Lei's third time as a special guest within the China and the World Forum. And today, Dr. Lei will navigate the intricate landscape of the China-US technology war and explore the central pillars of this conflict, the geopolitical and geoeconomic dimensions. So Dr. Lei began her professional career as a communication scholar at the University of Pennsylvania in the 1980s. From 1987 to 1996, she worked in the media conglomerate Capital Cities/ABC Incorporated. In New York, she was later promoted to vice president/director, then the highest ranking Asian in mainstream American media. From 1997, Dr. Lei served as an investment partner in Baring Communications Equity Asia Singapore. Since repatriating to Taiwan in 2000, Dr. Lei has been elected senator and appointed chairman of a government-owned enterprise KKL. In addition to serving as the chairperson of the National Women's League, she also holds many corporate board positions in Taiwan and chairs the board of a Hong Kong listed company. Now, we are also pleased to welcome back our familiar panel of experienced co-moderators. So the first is Professor Dashuan Feng, Honorary Dean of Henan University Belt and Road Research Institute and the Chief Advisor of China Silk Road I-Value Research Institute. Moving on to the next slide. Then lastly, our next co-moderator is Professor Stephen Pei, Professor of Electrical Engineering at the University of Houston. Professor Pei is also a co-organizer of the APA Justice Task Force and a Governance Committee Chair and Founding Board Chair of United Chinese Americans. Now, without further ado, let us welcome Dr. Lei to kick off the discussion.
Well, thank you for the introduction. Let me start with sharing the information. Hold on 1 second. Can you all see? Jasmine, can you all see the shared? Okay, good. Would people be able to see it?
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. Well, thank you once again for inviting me back. Each time I treat this as an assignment or a homework or a midterm paper given to me by Dashuan and Stephen. And they always find interesting topic for me to delve into and do some further thinking. And today the topic is China-US tech war. I understand from the earlier discussion that many of you are part of that technology advancement, especially those who are in Bell Lab, AT&T, IBM, and so on and so forth. So I'm not going to pretend to know all the intricate details about technology, but I would like to talk about the war behind the two great powers. One is on the United States front. They have moved from reactive measures to preemptive measures and also introduced proactive measures. On the PRC front, initially it was on the receiving end of a US reactive strategy, so it took alternative path for development and most recently a tit-for-tat strategy, and some discussion on the next frontier. And at the end of the introduction, I would like to put my 2 cents into how the world may change because of the dynamic and unstable, highly fluid relationship between the United States and the People's Republic of China. Let me start from some familiar charts that you've seen me use before. And I find them very interesting and very simplistic in explaining how I see the world. Starting from sometime around mid-2010, the first 10 years was a rising year. The second 10 years is where the United States have realized that there is a rising economic power, perhaps forever changing the balance of economic powers between United States, Europe, and China. And that would be the time when Obama and Hillary started talking about revisit, repivot, or rebalance. And the 2 background information is the 2 following chart. In the 1980s, US-China trade war actually doesn't exist. Most of the countries, if you look at the bottom, this is where the change, and this is a dynamic chart. You can go to the Huawei Institute and still find the dynamism from year to year. In the 1980s, the United States still dominated the world trade. It's the most important market. It set the rules, and also most of the players would like to work in concert with what American-dominated technology would dictate. But by 2018, and I'm sorry that Lowy didn't continue this chart, they finished at 2018, you would find that a lot of countries would have China as its #1 trading partner. And by now, over 140 countries have China as its #1 trading partner. And obviously, the dynamic and the pull from a market has changed the balance between the economic relationship between United States and China. So let me just quickly go into the United States front. We oftentimes hear words like delinking, de-risking, small yard, high fence, but let me go back to its origin. It started from a discussion of IPR theft or forced technology transfer. And then it quickly ascended, moved to a clearly stated national security concerns of the United States, or treating China as to the threats to regional peace. And I outlined 2 important documents. They are not the only ones, but they are very succinct and extremely clear. One was the National Security Strategy Report 2017, and the other one was National Defense Authorization Act 2019, in which there was a big chapter dedicated to this national security concern or threat to national or regional peace. So from the US perspective, it moved from trade and commerce to quote unquote a whole of government approach. State Department, Department of Defense, National Security Council, Congress, and sometimes the president himself would come out and make certain statements. In terms of the areas of control, it moves from advanced chips to advanced packaging, and most recently to chip making tool, to third-party suppliers, developers, and also personnel. So in that sense, you're seeing a very clear change in terms of the US strategy. But would that work? Let's go to a further detail. This is a chronology. I'm not gonna go into details, but it's to provide you with a general understanding on how things have progressed. 2014, it was a trade representative investigation. That's the Obama area, I think everybody remembers. And then 2016, Committee on Foreign Investment in the US started looking into such investment, including technology and company acquisition. 2017, the NSS report was one of the major milestones in terms of defining what China is and how China becomes a threat to technology and business and so on and so forth. 2018, you have presidential memo on the action by the US related to Section 301. I think people also would recognize that 301 has something to do with sanction and in terms of US's trade relations. Then you have a whole series of rules and regulations, such as Foreign Investment Risk Review Modernization Act, Export Control Reform Act, Bureau of Industry and Security, BIS list of representative technology categories, and then later on will give very clear entity list and allowing or not allowing transfer of products and technology to those entities. Then NDAA 2019, the one I mentioned earlier. In 2019, BIS amended the Export Administration Regulation, make it further clear in terms of the list and what it entails and what the consequences will be if you are on that list. And a list of China-based companies are among the first batch of companies included in the list. Then 2020 is a new sort of advent because you started to have more capital market involvement in terms of looking and controlling Chinese companies, especially tech-related. So holding foreign companies accountable act, 外国公司问责法, and PCAOB, which is a oversight board in terms of accounting practices, or introduced and being implemented. Now, let me give you a quick summary of what these all mean. It has introduced a series of barriers to free flow of product, capital, and people. So from the simplest and earliest trade tariff, which was the known sort of trade war between China and the United States, but most of those trade tariff was not applied to high tech, but to simple consumer products. But then you also have trade sanctions. You have capital market rules, regulations, and oversight that would dictate what a publicly listed PRC companies should and must act. Then you have investment restrictions or foreign investment ownership restrictions that would oversee the flow of investment and capitals. And that actually affected the Silicon Valley quite a lot. A lot of the tech company later on would have to repatriate or return the earlier angel investment from PRC in order to comply with the US rules. Then you have a whole series of export control, what can and what cannot be exported to China and what must be registered, pre-approved, and so on and so forth. Number 6, it's something I think a lot of you would have very visceral relationship or feelings about, because the restrictions on personnel was introduced, and visa control and China initiative investigations are rampant in a lot of science and technology field and companies. When I was studying in the United States in the 80s, there were a lot of Asian talents working in American tech companies. And now some of them are being looked at or accused of potentially not being quote unquote patriotic to the US interest. The last one is the most well-known case, I would think, is targeted long-arm law enforcement. That is the Meng Wanzhou case, and she was detained for more than a year, so for a very, very long period of time. Now, let me move on quickly to the proactive measures, because earlier I documented.
Joanne,
yes.
could you just remind people who Meng Wanzhou is?
Okay, Meng Wanzhou is the daughter of Ren Zhenfei, Huawei's current chairperson, CEO of Huawei. And she was accused of making erroneous representation to HSBC with respect in 2 pages with respect to the relationship between a company called Skycom and its relationship with Iran, because US has imposed sanctions against Iran. So her quote unquote erroneous representation or misrepresentation to a bank constituted a crime. But later on, of course, it was not founded, and they had reached an agreement. And Meng Wanzhou was later released and returned to China. Let me move on to the proactive measures, because you can see from reactive, you have IPR theft, you change the landscape, you're using state-owned enterprises for unfair competition, to preemptive. I do not want you to acquire state-of-the-art avant-garde technology in order for you not to move ahead of us. So those from reactive to preemptive. Now let me cover the proactive part. As early as 2015, the US government has a global connectivity initiative. It then introduced a Digital Gap Act. Then in 2016, and that was of course still Obama era, 2016, the Trump era has American AI initiative. They recognize the importance of artificial intelligence really early on. And DoD also have a artificial intelligence strategy outlined fairly clearly what the United States would do. In 2022, the most notable Chip 4 initiative was introduced. Companies in Korea and Taiwan were asked to move part of their higher grade manufacturing, such as 3 nanometer, 5 nanometer fabs into the United States. And then certainly you also have a Chips and Science Act, along with Endless Frontier Act and Chips for America Act. All of these are to build a stronger or a new strength on more advanced technology to support US technological advancement. So these are sort of 3 main thrusts and 7 specific measures used to really gradually increase the control of product, capital, and people. On the China side, let me just jump into the Huawei comeback, because Daxuan just reminded me that I should introduce people more to Meng Wanzhou. Meng Wanzhou is the daughter of Ren Zhengfei, the founder of Huawei, and you all know Huawei is not a listed company. So the founders still hold a lot of direction and very strong power in terms of where and how the company would go. Now, when Meng Wanzhou was released on 2021 in September, shortly thereafter, Huawei established or reorganized itself to establish the first batch of legions to look at vertical integration of certain industries. The first batch of legions are coal mine, smart highway, customs and port, smart photovoltaic, and data center energy. Then in 2 succession time, it then introduced a total of 15 regions. And this is an overall concept of how Huawei sees the use of digital technology and artificial intelligence for industry. And I think that's a very important point to make, because Huawei is not just a consumer company, it is actually an industry backbone and infrastructure in terms of its overall roadmap. Next is the Huawei comeback. There are 2 more sort of notable examples. In August this year, Mate 60 Pro was introduced, and recently Mate 60 Pro Plus is introduced. It's using a domestic 7 nanometer chip, and with a basket of connectivity breakthroughs, this promised to be the first multi-use mobile phone that allows you to connect with all artificial intelligence, digital technology, as well as the future cloud technology. It also allows a simple user to use this particular phone to make satellite calls. You don't need a specific satellite phone. You can just use this phone to make a satellite call. And I thought that was really remarkable, because when I was investing in communication, to be able to go through a LAN to satellite and then back, the uplink and downlink were extremely, how should we say, costly. But now the cost of a satellite phone, if you're in China, because they use Beidou, if you're not in China, you can't use it. If you're in China, the cost of a satellite call is just a couple of RMB, less than say $1 or $2 US. So Huawei has made a very strong comeback in terms of where it was choked. It was choked on high-end chips. It was choked on operating system, on the mobile phone, smartphone, and it came back really strong this year. But in addition to that, in the 19th Asia Game in September this year, they demonstrated massive ability to have flexible network, massive modeling capabilities. They connected all the venues with the model so that they can preempt or precede whatever could happen and do preemptive measures. It is a very strong technological demonstration, and I would strongly recommend anyone interested in the overall connectivity and AIoT, artificial intelligence of things, go into the website of Asia Game, and you can see the differences. And I picked up this digital person. This was one of the very important things. And it actually, for those who are in communication, with this, you would understand how much sort of infrastructure behind it were. They asked people to download the app. With each download, they wanted to have 100 million downloads. With each download, it contributes to one of the digital dot for this torchman. So at the end of the day, they have 130 million downloads, and throughout the entire Asia game, you could see the use of all kinds of technology, from simple communication to artificial intelligence to virtual learning and so on and so forth. So now let me go back to what China has been doing. Initially, China was blocked out of certain areas. On the right-hand side is, of course, the International Space Station. China was blocked from it. It was not introduced and not allowed to use it. So China developed an alternative path for its own space station. This year, you will see more international participation, and you will have more
May I add a comment here?
Sure.
China was blocked in 1993 when the U.S. started the International Space Station, ISS. And then in 2011, there's a Wolf Amendment that prevented China to work with NASA.
Okay.
So it's been going on for 30 years, more than 30 years.
Right. And right now you can see there will be a very sharp demarcation between the International Space Station, which is supposed to retire next year or out of commission next year, but they are looking at expanding its use, and the recent China space station. These are the technology of different generations. The second one was also an alternative path. The United States have asked its European alliance or partners not to use Huawei technology in terms of 5G deployment. And this is a chart by Statista. You can see that the dark blue color is the 5G network launched. And then you have a lighter color, which is the 5G technology deployed, and then investment. It is sort of on the first side, you could see, okay, the United States and China are roughly, about the same. But if you look at a further discussion in terms of how much was actually drawdown used by individuals, you can see that there will be a faster deployment of 5G technology, also because of greater applications and greater digital connectivity in the China region. You would see a further development in terms of 5G application. So by 2025, you can see by 2025, you would see, say, US move to 63%, South America, Latin America to 11%, then Europe is at around 44%, and so on and so forth. Greater China, this number is definitely underrepresented, because by 2025, China will not only have 5G, it will have 5.5G, which is currently being deployed, and perhaps even 6G. So because it's being asked not to go into certain areas, China went into the alternative areas, and I think the most notable one would be in Africa. This chart didn't have like this one. On the left side chart, you can see South Africa and some other part in the eastern part of Africa. China built these networks and will quickly introduce state-of-the-art 5G to even 6G application and connectivity to even the most remote villages. I was a sort of communication scholar, we dreamed of a world when all people can be connected, and 5G, 5.5G, and with its extremely low cost, they're using solar panels, extremely small, portable, like in a size of a suitcase, kind of base stations. You can deploy these kind of technologies to even the most underdeveloped infrastructure areas. Next. The next phase is the most recent phase, and I use tit for tat for this. I only documented 3 stages, but it will go on and on. Because in August this year, first time ever, China imposed export restrictions on gallium and germanium. Of course, you know these are the 2 very critical materials, and I will show you later on. And then on November 26, US announced new measures to limit AI-related chips to China, and very quickly, 3 days later, China further limits export of high-grade graphite. I think you would see this like ping pong type of tit for tat in select, narrowly focused area. And this is a new strategy recently being deployed, and certainly you would all know that it has implication on a lot of vertical industries, semiconductors, 3rd-generation chips, radar, advanced library, airspace, and so on and so forth, even in green industry. And this is how it matters. And I'm sorry that this is a Chinese map, but I'm gonna use, this is a concentration index. When some metal is concentrated beyond 25%, you will see an extremely high concentration. So the 2, the first one and the third one, the germanium, these 2 have really high concentration in China. In addition to that, it had very little change in the last 10 years in terms of its concentration. And I put this chart because people thought about, okay, no big deal. We can also do that. We can reproduce it. We have ability to mine it and to process it. But in the last 10 years, people were talking about rare earth being a potential strategic elements in terms of a competition. In 10 years, there were very little changes in its concentration, telling you that there are market forces that remain as is. Okay, and then the third big trend is working on the next frontier. I actually personally tried this car, and I'm dying to try this car. I'll tell you why. This is a chart from January to August 2023 in terms of shipment of all the electronic vehicles around the world. And by now, you will know about 50% of the EVs on Earth is traveling in China. They were being manufactured by highly automated process, and also covers a very big span of market. This tiny little car, I mean, certainly these other really technology and advanced sharp designs are fantastic. Like this one, it's a new concept, and I tried it myself. This one has everything being controlled by touch screen, and the center part is your small little cooler or coffee warmer. AIoT is Huawei's joint venture, is adding intelligence to auto. But I think this small car is really interesting. It's Wuling Hongguang, made by Guangxi's a small company used to make pickup trucks. This one is about 3 meters big, perfect for urban commute, and the cost of it is about 28,000 RMB. It is just a little bit more than the cost of a motorcycle in Taiwan, or electronic motorcycle in Taiwan. You add about 50%. You have a perfect car for urban commute for youngsters. And once you have these youngsters coming into the market, they will never go back to the original sort of fossil fuel based autos. Why I treat this as a special chart, I think if you look at the next frontier, China is really strategic, and also it's working it in a socially responsible way, because we know 20% of the carbon emission comes from autos. And China has no way of competing with Germany or Japan, those two huge exporter of the old auto industry, and it cannot compete with Detroit. But if you're looking at a environmentally friendly electronic vehicle, China is moving light speed ahead. Also in terms of EV battery makers supporting it. All of these, in terms of the next frontier, has a long list. So the race continues. You race in space and deep sea exploration. Recently, a commercial deep sea exploration just commenced. And you also have United States and China racing to land on the moon again with humans, and then perhaps go to the Mars. Then in AIoT and AI for industries and AI learning, cloud and big data, quantum computing, and I don't pretend to know what quantum entanglement is. Daxuan can add again. But all of these, in terms of these all very advanced computations, are being thought about in all kinds of labs all over China. You know, a lot of you are scientists. You go to these labs and you will be touched by how many people are dedicated to fundamental problems. And the third one is on open standard. Certainly,
Joanne,
yes.
may I
Go
insert
ahead.
a question?
Yes.
May I insert a question here from someone? I think it's interesting. He or she said, how would you read Gina Raimondo's recent remark, China's not our friend, biggest threat we've ever had?
Yes. Well, you know, starting from trade, China is being seen as a threat, but I was mostly disappointed by Gina and Burns. Both of them, one's military, another is,
Diplomatic.
commerce. Yeah. They both made statements about China and US would eventually go into direct confrontation. They have used words like war, and I would try to be more cautious. I think they are looking at the world from a zero-sum perspective. But we have learned from the internet revolution that when you confront or when you try to go into the next frontier, the new frontier, there's so much risk for everyone. So you have to work in a win-win situation. We are not naturally win-win people. We want to dominate everything. But if you look at the risk, you look at your partners, people who can bring the other elements into it, then you say, aha, let's work together. Perhaps if we win, we all win. If we lose, we each don't lose that much. Both Burns and Raimondo have not moved into the new era, and I feel very disappointed because they made the statement after the San Francisco APEC. Okay, let me go back to the open standard. I think that's really important. Initially, in the smartphone, you have Apple's iOS. Then Google came in with Android, rather open standard based on ARM technology. Now you have a lot of people really working on a further opening up of the standards for everyone to develop new applications. So RISC-V is it's not new, but it's a very important initiative and with a lot of thrust behind it. And the fourth is forward compatibility. And I think people who work in technology knows that backward compatibility is easy because when you design something, you need to be backward compatible. But forward compatibility requires very deep and clear roadmap from the get-go. So if we look at Harmony Next, which is Huawei's new operating system, Harmony and Harmony Next. Harmony Next claims that it will no longer be compatible with Android. For those who are not that familiar, Harmony initially was compatible with Android, so Huawei mobile phone can use Facebook, YouTube, and so on and so forth. And now Huawei was forced to delink with Android by the US restrictions. And now Harmony Next claim that it will no longer be compatible with Android. And I think very soon, Google and the rest players in the Android field will claim that they will now work on compatibility with Huawei's Harmony Next as an operating system. Okay, if you want to be forward compatible, you have to start from baseband and up. So, for example, Google has now faced some problems in terms of going into their new apps when they try to develop their own chips because they lack the baseband foundation. Huawei not only started with baseband up. Baseband is like a modem that can connect your mobile phone with other GSM, CDMA, and whatever operating system there might be. Huawei new Pro 60 can quickly, in nanosecond, make such connection with any possible platform out there because their baseband is really, really strong and it's their own technology. And the second important point is, if you look at Huawei being sanctioned by the United States or choked to the nth degree, there are also tons of people jumped into Huawei's bandwagon. So in a very short period of time, less than 2 years, Huawei's Harmony has 2.2 million developers working on all different aspects of the its circle. And then recently, when it says, I will no longer be compatible with Android, and now Android is now thinking whether they need to be compatible with Harmony, 23 985 universities, which are the top universities in China, and 46 211 departments, which are the top departments. So maybe a university is not a top university, but has a top department and is earmarked by 211. 46 211 departments offer Harmony-based, Harmony-related courses as of last month. In other words, it will have a very massive reserve of developers and developers to be. Then certainly we can also look at explosive developments in many areas, EV, green energy, digital finance. And once you talk about digital finance, you can even go into digital currency and new world financial order, and so on and so forth. The list just goes on. So China moving to the next frontier and continue to race in its own speed with massive ground control, starting from basic science to applied science to developers for a specific platform. To sum up, initially, when China was blocked in certain area, it went into an alternative path. That's by necessity. It has no choice. Recently, there are some countermeasures. So tit for tat would happen, and I believe will be in select restricted areas. And then China continues to race with its full speed to the next frontier. What does this all mean? I would like to put two different perspectives. One is geopolitical point of view, and another is geoeconomic point of view as didactic designs. If you go to the US Navy Institute's news, they will give you a chart like this. They will tell you, where the submarines are, where their carrier strike groups are, how they see the world. That's a geopolitical point of view. Great power relationship between the United States and China are now in flux. And I'm borrowing the thesis of Mearsheimer. And Mearsheimer's thesis is that US is a great power with a thesis of being a regional hegemon. And regional hegemon doesn't mean there will be other regional hegemon. This regional hegemon doesn't want to have other regional hegemon to even challenge or threaten its hegemony. So that's the overall sort of thesis in Mearsheimer, and certainly he is one of the most respected strategists, a pragmatic strategist in current time. Now, if you take that perspective, meaning that your gain is my loss, then we may have three scenarios: traveling down the current path, or we can have heightened alert, or we can manage lower tension. Each will have its ultimate consequences. if you travel down the current path, there will be, just like in football, a block and tackle going on in many, many areas. And it can be in finance, in economic, in military, in foreign affairs, in different areas. It can be in communication today, in space tomorrow. There will be block and tackle strategies. And at the end of the day, such as in the case of the mobile phone and smartphone, the world could go into a bipolar world or multiple circle of friends kind of situation. You will have one really strong center, which is the United States, and that would not change. But you will perhaps have other centers and lesser, smaller, no doubt, but there could be other centers. So it could be bipolar, it could be multipolar. On the second scenario, if we don't manage this kind of relationship well, you allow people like what you claim just now, or you asked just now, Burns, Raimondo, with all this really tough lingo, there could be heightened alert or even tough measures. And that could lead to all-out MMA, which is mixed martial arts. This is something I learned recently. You know, you can have a lot of different combat sports. MMA is something that has almost no rule. You can use anything, and you can use all your strength. And the goal is to defeat your enemy. So you could potentially go out to the MMA kind of arena. And that will lead to potential for military confrontation. Bear in mind that I did not use and will not use the word war too lightly, because I don't think we should talk about it lightly. Then, you know, being an optimist, what if we have huge disasters like 2012? Or if we have earthquakes in lots of the horror movies, or pandemic that we just passed? What if the world requires all of us, especially great powers and the strong technology players, to cooperate and co-develop solutions or safety net for human race? Then those are situations that we must work in lowered tension. A further expansion of this, when great power are in flux, their relationship are in flux, each great power could be defined simplistically by their military might and economic strength. This is a chart that I used before. If you are strong in both fields, you can easily move between the four theaters: in military, in diplomacy, in finance, in trade. If you are weak in both, perhaps you could use advocacy or diplomacy, which is on this side. If you are strong economically without military might, then you can use trade, finance, and diplomacy. If you are strong in military without economic might, you would use diplomacy and military. And one of the most notable example would probably be North Korea or the Soviet at this time. Now, why I'm saying could potentially lead to military confrontation. That is to say, if you're moving between all these theaters, you fight here, fight there, and then all of a sudden there's something that's so big, so tangible, so unthinkable in terms of your own security and your own hegemony, that you could potentially venture into certain form of gray zone area, gray zone warfare, or a posture of a military advancement. And that has always been an option. These are charts from the US strategic charts, and you can see that this is the world we're in. Taiwan is right here. Taiwan Strait is here. This is first island chain, second island chain, and so on and so forth. China is trying to break through, and the United States is trying to contain, and this is a long-standing sort of military overall picture. More recently, you could see two deployments in our neighborhood. Between the first, second, and third island chain, their movement from the first to the second and the third by the United States in terms of its strategic assets and using its partners or military alliances in Japan, Korea, and the Philippines for the advanced advanced operation base is called EABO technology or strategy. But in addition to that, once you go into a detailed analysis of the massive build-out of PRC Navy, including its submarines, and the most recent submarines will be based in here, Hainan. Hainan. These submarines would not only look at the South China Sea, but also potentially be able to launch, their missiles are about 12,000 kilometers long in terms of its range. It could continue to safeguard the fourth and the fifth island chain. These are being planned and perhaps will be introduced in the future. For those who understand Belt and Road initiatives such as Daxuan and those who understand China's strategy, you could see that these are designed based on the Belt and Road initiatives. This is Sri Lanka port, this is Gwadar, Pakistan port, and Djibouti port. And these three are where China has its existence or presence. So China is here, and the United States are potentially planning on the fourth island chain and the fifth island chain. And that is why the strategy is now from Indian Ocean all the way to the Pacific. Not just a Pacific strategy or West Pacific strategy, but Indo-Pacific strategy. And getting closer to this area, the United States has 18 military bases, 4 of which are new. 1, 2, 3, 4. These 4 are all in the northern part of Philippines and the Palawan Peninsula Islands, southern part of the Philippines, at the bottom of the South China Sea, somewhere here. So 18 military bases, a huge landmass, and perhaps if there were confrontation between, then the confrontation will be somewhere around here. Okay, sorry, somewhere around here. And there will be advanced military deployment. There will be even drones and other type of technologies, and potentially they are even talking about attacks from the space. So we are entirely capable of destroying ourselves. And what I put here is Taiwan Strait. It's a critical link in the Indo-Pacific theater, and a critical link if there were ever a potential war or someone who has an illusion that they can manage a limited war. Now, from another perspective, Belt and Road Initiative has been talked about all over the world. Daxuan has a really good book, and I recommend everybody to read about it, but I deliberately picked the Economist picture because Economist has its own position, and I thought using their picture is very interesting. It has our current situation has a very strong impact on the global supply chain. The global supply chain in terms of global sourcing, just-in-time management, and the current distribution of trade and commerce are all disrupted. So there are a couple of potential scenarios as well. The first one is if they started being used as a tool against the other party, then the trading blocs, such as the European Union, and America has a very strong alliance with the EU, a trading bloc can be a sanction bloc, meaning that you're my partner in certain things and you have to work in concert with me in sanctioning China. And that would move or potentially go into gray zone confrontation, gray zone warfare. The second is you also will simultaneously have a very strong and quick realignment of supply chains. And there could be establishment of regional trading blocs very quickly. Excuse me for a second. And if that should happen, the world would go into divergent development path. Depends on where and which block you belong to. And the third is a more general scenario, which is with the increase of cost in terms of, bill of materials, manufacturing. One more second. The way we understand and operate in the modern sort of industrial age will move into just-in-case inventory. In addition to having what you need on a just-in-time basis, you would have a reserve. And that is why in the last 2 years, you will have a build-up of a chip reserve. And now we're trying to ease the huge build-out and trying to consume them. If you continue to have all these overbuilds and increase of building materials and building costs, shipping costs, and so on and so forth, the cost will rise. So it could lead to general inflation and/or economic decline in select areas or sectors. And the last one, again, as an optimist, I think we also have an opportunity to redesign the world economic order. And China is actually doing just that. China is opening up its domestic market with China International Expo, sorry, this is a typo, Import Expo, and a China International Supply Chain Expo that just closed in Beijing, as well as Hainan Free Trade Zone or Free Trade Harbor. All of this will give a really huge market opportunity for countries that are willing to take that opportunity and work in concert with China to develop a new world economic order. So what would that mean? That means that not only the RCEP, which is now already the largest trading bloc, the smaller ones in Africa, in South America, would also have greater share in terms of the world trade if they work in concert with RCEP and China. If the United States should decide not to work in concert with them, continue to work on a separate path of supply chain. It also means that for a lot of countries in the world, especially the Belt and Road Initiative countries, already 151 of them, they would have an opportunity to take advantage of the advanced technology already proposed and market tested in China to help their economy and their people into a faster, expedited development path in a new way. So in closing, I think we are always at a crossroad, but this time humanity is truly at a crossroad because we have wars everywhere in the world. The world is in flux. Will tech war lead to heightened tension and intensified arms race? Is tech war a part of the new Cold War, which doesn't have really direct hot confrontation, or it is a theater of a World War III, which is already happening or unfolding in front of us? Is China really a threat? Is the China threat to the United States security real or perceived? And then finally, let us think, if 2023 in San Francisco, two most important leaders could talk and then look at a future that people can coexist, co-develop for a better world, why would it be a tipping point, and why wouldn't it be a tipping point? Why would we still hear languages of a potential heightened tension, confrontation, or a word that I hate to use, war? With that, I close my presentation, and hopefully I've given you some basic information and some fruitful thoughts. Thank you.
Fantastic talk. My good friend Bali Deepak, who is a professor of Chinese everything of Jawaharlal Nehru University in India, I have some questions, I think, for you, Joanne. Let me say a little bit more about Bali. Bali is a good friend of mine for, we're over more than 10 years now. He is a true Chinese scholar. He told me that he wanted his compatriots in India to learn about China's intellectual architecture. And to do so, Indians should read the 4 books, 四书. But of course, for Indians to read 四书 is virtually impossible. So he did the plan B thing. He translated the 四书into Hindi so that Indians can actually read it. Bali, can you ask your question now?
Yeah, thank you, Professor Fang, for those nice words. Hi, Joanna. It was really a wonderful and insightful talk. I love listening to it. My question, in fact, it's not a question, it's a sort of comment and maybe a little bit different, and I think I liked your analogy when you were placing this artificial intelligence with the geopolitics and geoeconomics. And I believe if it is used in geopolitics, perhaps, various scenarios which you build, the first scenario in all the cases perhaps is most possible. But I think, it reminds me of Professor Fang's area, that is physics. And if you draw an analogy between nuclear physics and artificial intelligence, then I think they'll get a little clearer picture in which direction the world is heading, and perhaps at later point in time, when it proliferates, to a certain level after geoeconomics part of it, then perhaps countries, they would like to, take initiative to regulate it. So my question is pertaining to how do you perceive the regulation of artificial intelligence so that, it doesn't become dangerous as the nuclear proliferation has become. In this context, though it appears that US is, and China so, willing to cooperate in this aspect, and San Francisco summit between President Xi and Biden is an indication in that direction. But I think since there is geopolitical rivalry at this point in time, how far you think, this regulation or the duopoly which is being played between United States and China as far as artificial intelligence is concerned, how will it play out? Primarily because I think, next week in India, there is an alliance called the Global Partnership for Artificial Intelligence. They are having a conference in India, and ridiculously, China is out of that. Even if China accounts for almost 28% of the artificial intelligence research, and probably, I think by 2030, it will account for almost $1.5 trillion of the artificial intelligence market. So therefore, if you see the geopolitics of it, I think some kind of regulation, as in the case of International Atomic Energy Agency, do you think certain things playing out in this field in the near future?
Well, I think this is a really insightful question, because in the San Francisco summit, they did talk about a potential of defining the boundaries and rules of artificial intelligence. And the analogy to nuclear power is nuclear weapons is really clear. I think the great powers, the ones who have the ability, India is of course one of the countries that would have the ability to develop fast into the new frontiers, have learned that you cannot wait until everyone have embarked in its own courses and then to have a SALT 1, SALT 2 to try to limit them. And any attempt try to limit or to reduce the number of nuclear warhead post hoc would not work. So people are trying to do ad hoc, trying to do it preemptively. But you also mentioned a really important factor here. There is very little trust between the powers that are butting head at this time. Even in basic intellectual property rights, the United States doesn't trust China, saying China is stealing its IPR. China certainly has been sanctioned enough times to know that if I don't do it my own way, I may not have a transfer from the United States. So there are no basic trust between the companies and the countries that are all capable of developing artificial intelligence that could potentially even harm humanity. And there are no reason or no answer at this point. We were able, or we were hoping that the United Nations were able to work in these advanced areas. For example, in maritime orders, right? International laws governing how exclusive economic zones and interest between countries can be resolved. But United States decided not to sign it. So there are attempts on a bipartisan way or bilateral way, but the ultimate capability would still reside, in my view, on the multilateral front, which will be in UN and UN bodies. At this time, it is important to ask all countries and companies having the ability to do this to participate in the multilateral international front. If countries with strong technology and strong capabilities refuse to play ball in the international multilateral way, then we will reinvent ourselves in terms of the nuclear weapon kind of path history. And that will be a disaster for human beings as well. Artificial intelligence is a great thing. Let me just add one more thing. In the future, Indian will not need to read your translation, I'm sorry, but they can use Huawei's artificial intelligence and they can read Sishu, the 4 books. And Huawei even allow the smaller languages, meaning smaller number of users languages, to use their native language, go directly into it to get English materials, translations, and then translate back to their own native languages. And this is a great equalizer, allowing the world's civilizations or different cultures to be on equal footing, accessing a massive wealth of English-based information. And those are really, really amazing and inspiring possibilities. So if we continue to travel this path, using AI for AI-aided learning, then we can build a better world. And if we go the other way, using it against each other, we will repeat the terrible situation of a nuclear threat or a threat to a potential nuclear warfare. And I always use potential. Thank you.
Thank you.
Stephen.
Yes. Joanna, I think you propose different scenario what the outcome of the world may look like. I think my question to you is, just like in the high-tech industry, when there's a disruptive technology emerge, that change the whole playground completely. Would that be fair to consider what's happening in China now is China introduced a new economic system. And the question is, many countries at this moment do not know how to compete and successful in that new environment. And people are afraid and scared.
Yeah. Well, let me draw from our past experience. When the United States have IBM and Microsoft, the other countries didn't have the ability, and they actually embraced. what the American technology bring to them, making it a potential tools for learning, for productivity, for design, for innovation. Now, if you see China as a threat, then you wouldn't embrace whatever technology coming out of China. But if you see China as the United States in the 60s, the 70s, bringing advent of technology and science to people who do not need to invent it. Just think about telephone. It's really complicated. Even just the basic telephone needs signaling 7 to go through a path and then allow people to communicate. Those were advent of US technologies. I often think that when people started embracing Facebook, YouTube, using those, why weren't they concerned like what the United States claimed that TikTok would do? Is China really such a terrible party bringing a potential threat to security? Therefore, you need to block whatever offered by that particular economy in terms of its technological advancement? That is something to be debated and to be tested. I think there are two other areas to discuss. One is, what are the boundary conditions of our world? If you live in China, your world is forever changed. All the digital transfer, transaction, technology, it's part of your everyday life, and you would never go back to what it was before. You drive your EV, you will probably never go back to a fossil fuel car as those before, because you're in this car, it gives you all kinds of connectivity to everything that you need to connect with, from your mobile phone communication to your home office to your other colleagues in other places, remote, satellite, whatever. When we dreamed of anywhere, anytime, anything, anyone, that was a dream. And now this dream is an everyday reality of people in China. Now, look at Uzbekistan or Pakistan. This is a country that doesn't have this infrastructure. If China is seen as a threat, they would still not have it. If China is seen as a potential offerer of empowering technologies, then they could have basic infrastructures like road and airports and railroads, and they could have digital infrastructure being provided by China, just like our mobile communication was built by Notel, by Nokia, by Ericsson, by AT&T. They could have those built by Huawei, and then people in that area could quickly join this new world where language barrier is no longer a barrier, civilization can be on equal footing, and the world can all share the general knowledge developed by people in other places. Call me an optimist, but I think that world is quite a nice world.
Yeah, I think Joanna, I think you're right. I think you're an optimistic. But I think your response focused on technology. I think that's true. If the world can share all the technology advancement, that would be wonderful. But I think the challenge we're facing today is a little bit further. I think in terms of economic ecosystem, what China has mastered is once they master technology, they can really mass produce the product at very competitive cost.
Mm-hmm.
That's not just at the scale we talk about, it's not just the government subsidiary can handle. That really, for example, EV's example. I went to China, I visited an EV company 20 years ago. And the fierce competition among the over 100 EV companies in China. And they really drive in the technology and also cost down so much. At that time, the Chinese vehicle was a joke. When we test the reliability or the collision test in Germany, and basically China's vehicle cannot pass any of those tests. Most recently, BRD test their vehicle collision test by Germany. They got 100% score. It's competitive to anybody else. But once this economic model, I don't know who else has the market can support and compete. I think that's make a lot of countries worry. They don't know how to compete in that new environment.
Let me try to address two issues. One is the number one barrier to the expansion or adoption of China technology, in my view, is the predisposition or the language used by the United States in proposing China technology with a threat. So if they don't believe that China technology is harmless, then they will not adopt it. So that predisposition needs to be tested. And that was my sort of precondition or my premise. Secondly, let me address a little bit in terms of the distribution of value. If you look at anything, let me take a simple example, whatever. So this is just an example, okay? I have something in my hand. The China price disruption, the China price is its ex-factory price, right? So in the past, this one may be $10 RMB. From this place to an American consumer, there will be other costs adding to it. And on top of it, if I put Porsche on it, then I would also have a brand equity added to it. So outside of the real cost, this is the real economy. Outside of the cost, the China ex-factory cost, you have the brand companies and the selling companies, the marketing companies, garnering the largest share of its economic benefit. Once you have this large part, the premium being compressed, you would still have the China manufacturing selling you still 10 RMB because that's his ex-factory cost. So now think, if you live in a very far away place, let me still use Pakistan, for example. You want to buy an American, let me call this jeans. You want to buy an American jeans, which is made in Bangladesh, but using American brands. It has a huge premium added to it. Once you go to buy China direct, you would pay the China price. You would still have the benefit of this specific product, but you wouldn't have the premium paid currently to the brand equity and the ones who are using manufacturing X as its merchandising tools. Okay. Now, what do I mean by that? If you are really in a less developed economy, you now have a chance to buy a product, maybe that EV, without paying the US brand premium. The brand equity premium can be taken away, making it that much more possible for global South countries to embrace new technology with the new China price strategy. I know that a lot of companies in the process who currently are sharing a lion's share of the economic benefit that doesn't produce and doesn't provide the raw materials will say, oh, unfair, because brand equity is built over a long, long time. I worked in brand equity before, but if you just look at the world and if you want to popularize new advancement, you want everyone to have it. You want everyone to have a mobile phone to be connected to the world. If you want everybody to have a tab to be able to look at important things, what you need to address is to lower the cost to the extent that you can provide universal access and equal access. So you see, we're looking at a different, critical points. If you look at universal access and equal access, then having a price disruption by China manufacturing, it's a very good thing because now you are able to provide less developed places with top top-notch technology without paying top-notch price. So that's my other comeback.
Well, I think, Joanna, you touched on it. The other side of the question is really a whole distribution system.
Correct.
Just like what Amazon did to the department stores and what today the Pinduoduo is doing to Alibaba. So there's a totally different model there. But don't let me dominate the discussion here. There's a question from the audience. How would you comment on Moody's recent cutting its outlook on Chinese sovereign bonds to negative?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the last part. Let me take a look at the question.
Well, I think you just downgrade the Moody just downgrade the rating.
I would recommend anybody to go to Peter Peterson Foundation's analysis of U.S. debt situation, because that is actually quite a solid source of information. And from the Peter Peterson's analysis, in terms of sovereignty, the United States have a long-term issue that actually has no immediate solution. Its current physical structure used most of its physical receipts to mandatory areas such as Social Security, Medicare and Medicaid, and so on and so forth. It only has very limited arbitrary room for them to invest or to even use in military means. And the other large part is debt service. So when you have an aging population, your pension and medical costs will continue to rise. So those mandatory areas will continue to expand. Your overall debt service, due to the increase in the current interest rate, will also increase, also by the increasing number of national debt, which is north of 33 trillion. So if you just look at the overall structure, there are no tangible means to resolve the current debt issue. The current physical deficit cannot be resolved, let alone resolved in an election year. No one could touch the so-called entitlement programs. No one would be suicidal to take away something people believe that they are entitled to. So Peter Peterson has a very long analysis saying that the debt service in terms of US national debt could go to about 14% from 3 to 5% of the physical receipt. If you look at that, it makes perfect sense for all three rating organizations to, sometimes they downgrade, sometimes they just say the outlook is from stable to negative. They actually don't see on a sort of a national sovereignty level a short-term change of the existing path. So I think it's very, what should we say? It's very rational for them to make this call. It's very difficult for a rating organization to make such a call, especially against a huge country, the United States. But it's very rational for them to make the call.
Joanne?
Thank you. Diving back to you.
Joanne?
Yes.
Let's change the tone a little bit. What you're talking today is about the competition of the West, especially the United States, and the East, especially China. Let me stand at the 10,000 feet level, looking at China and looking at the United States. I see in China that in 15 years, starting in 2008, China built over 40,000 kilometers of a complex system of high-speed rail, whereas United States in the same period is still struggling building the Los Angeles to San Francisco high-speed rail, and they're not sure when it will be finished. Would the world outside of these two big camps look at this not just because of the technology difference, but because their political systems are different?
I think there are very smart scholar who use the word 举国体制, whole of a government or whole of a country approach. When China does something, you can call it authoritarian or what you may, but it is using and mobilizing all of its strength, all the muscles to direct or to channel to specific areas. Take what you just laid out, for example. In 2000, from the time when Taiwan built our first high-speed rail, China didn't have a high-speed rail. Taiwan built its first one. China didn't have one. China was trying to learn from its suppliers. And then now, China is by far the greatest infrastructure builder. They can deal with very complex and fragile geographies, broken tunnels underneath, waters, all kinds of problems with this massive building machine. So I think the whole of a country approach, 叫举国体制, has its benefit, especially for a country trying to race to the finish line in a fast, expedited development path. Wherever they direct the energy to, it mobilizes everything to a specific target, and then they can move on to the next and to the next and the next. The first time I went to my father's birthplace, that was 1997. The province had almost no highway, which was Jiangxi. The road leading to his old village was dirt road. Now Jiangxi has over 4,000 kilometers of highways, an extensive railroad system. All villages have roads, and all villages have 5G communications. So this is the strength of a whole of a government, a whole of country approach. Of course, there are overbuilt, there are waste, and there are potentially corruption in different places. But if you look at the overall results and the civilization they built in such a short period of time, it has shown a remarkable efficiency in building something state of the art and with the light speed.
There is also a question from the audience. What percentage of the people in China drive electrical vehicle?
Oh, I don't know how much, but Xi Jinping said 50% of the EVs currently on Earth is in China. So, you know, half of the EV produced in the world is now sold in the China market. And if you look at BRD, from the 5 million mark, the 5 million vehicle mark to the 6 million vehicle mark, it took them less than 3 months. So they are making 300,000 per month in a very fast speed. And most importantly, of course, this is just sort of very casual conversation. I ask all taxi drivers, I ask young people, I ask them, will they ever go to, whether there are still concerns in terms of, you know, not having the power, not having the power grid in terms of being stuck on the road, which was the #1 obstacle in the past. None of them have such concerns. I think the China infrastructure, the power infrastructure, also helped popularize EV. And that is something that other countries have not done. And certainly if you're looking at Germany and other places in Europe, they would ban use of or sale of a fossil fuel car by 2035. They really need to resolve the basic power infrastructure, and that takes country, which is national infrastructure. It's not something that a country can rely on private enterprises or private car company to build. It has to take a national initiative. And that is why I said China is racing to the next frontier for themselves, but also sometimes for the rest of the world. If we were to reduce the carbon emission, 20% of carbon emission comes from fossil fuel autos. And that is an issue that you must have market-tested solutions. And EV in China is a market-tested solution.
Thank you, Joanne. I think any more questions from the audience? I just take a quick look at the Wikipedia. This is 2021 data for EV. Inside China, China sold about $7.8 million vehicles, EV vehicles, with light-duty plug-in EV. At the same period, Europe is about 5.6 million. United States, 2.3 million.
Mm-hmm.
My understanding is this number for China was double in 2022.
Yeah, it will escalate like this.
Right.
If you look at
So,
28,000 RMB, I mean, this is fantastic.
I think the response to your comment about the infrastructure, just more than just the high-speed rail. That's what happened. 20 years ago, I saw in a gas station, they have the charging station ready, even though they don't have customer at that time. So I think that is really limit the ability of Japan to develop into the electric vehicle. Because I think at this moment, even you buy the electric vehicle, you have a hard time to charge it up. I think that's what the government role can be, besides in the long-term planning, but also instead of subsidize the industry, you build the infrastructure to support the industry. That's where the charging system is about in China. But on the other hand, if you talk about EV per capita, there's also a number. China is 5.6%, and compared to others, Norway is what? Much, much higher. So if you divide it by population, China still have a long way to go.
But in terms of absolute number, China is the largest market.
Yeah.
Another trend is early on, China exported a lot of EVs to Europe under European brand name. And right now, China gained its own popularity and trust by consumers. So it started exporting to Europe, which is certainly a very tough auto market, by its own brand name, which is also a new trend. I saw Philip Chow saying that Taiwan needs to remove itself from being such a ridiculous pawn in the Pacific. I fully agree with you. There is no reason Taiwan Strait should be a war zone. There is no reason whatsoever. We were able to manage our relationship even with our political differences and without a truce agreement. Between 2008 and 2016, of course, that's the Ma Ying-jeou era, we were able to hold 11 high-level official department-to-department negotiation, signing 23 agreements, putting the political differences and hostility aside. We were able to manage a really pragmatic relationship between the two governments. So if we were to be pushed into an unlikely, I hope unlikely, war scenario, that would be a totally unnecessary scenario.
I remember between 2007 to 2014, the 7 years, I spent my time in Taiwan. And it was during the Ma Ying-jeou time. And it was the time where the 9/2 consensus were the document between the two sides, agreement on the two sides. I remember almost on a weekly basis, there are mainland Chinese universities visiting the university I was at, both in the south in National Cheng Kung University and in the north, National Tsinghua University. And I also have a sort of a joke of a comment. I say that every day when people wakes up in the morning in Taiwan, they think of one thing, is where should I spend holidays this year in China, rather than how to fight back into and 反攻大陆, that concept was gone.
That's true.
I don't know what it's like now. I suspect people still hope that there would be peace between Taiwan and the mainland, although I don't know whether the enormous exchange of people back and forth is still there. I suspect not. And that is very sad. Perhaps my friend Li Dingguo, who's from the Academia Sinica, are you still there, Li Dingguo? Okay, he's not. Li Dingguo is in the Physics Institute at the Academia Sinica, 中央研究院. Li Dingguo, are you still there? Oh, good.
Yeah, he's still there.
Could you say something about the feeling in Taiwan about mainland China and generally?
Well, I think most people are not happy that seems like we are getting more and more dangerous. The situation is clear. It's getting more and more dangerous. And we become less confident what will happen next. I think maybe Joanna knows much better. My own feeling is that this is, of course, people get very nervous about this because we don't really know what China will do or what US will do. Actually, it's all over both of them, and we are not sure. It's a general feeling that this is a little bit out of control of Taiwan people, and that I think it's the insecurity is probably a much more general feeling.
I think the bigger concern I have now is really the exchange between US and China. I think the problem, actually people heard more about it, is about the STEMs, scientists and students coming to the US. I think that got a lot of attention, but I think one less mentioned problem we're facing today is really the scholars and students we send to China has substantially reduced. So that means we do not understand where do we get our next generation of scholars and the students who understand China, then we can interact with China effectively. If we don't have students going to China study there, we don't have scholars going there, the number has been dropped so much that really alarming. And people have been arguing, there's no reason we should stop the Fulbright program with China. If we don't have the next generation leader who understand China, that's a very dangerous situation.
Actually, this is the part I was also going to ask Dr. Lei. This is about you were talking about goods and commodity economies. I was thinking about human resource. And the problem with in Taiwan and actually in Asia, in Taiwan, is that we are, has very low birth rate. So we are really short of human resources. So all the university has less students coming in, even from Taiwan. And this is a kind of a situation now. It's bad in the sense that we need a lot of students, but China has a lot for them, and they are the graduate of their college students cannot find jobs. But there are many possibilities in Taiwan, but we cannot. They are not welcome to Taiwan. They are not able to come. And this situation, I bet, in many other countries like Japan, and things are getting. This is really a waste in the even larger scale than the materials and the human resources, education, and advancement of the whole human culture not even technology, are really suffering because of this kind of block mentality. And this is, I wonder whether you have any study that give a much more scientific assessment of this kind of problem.
Well, demography is a very clear science. If you have 100,000 children born this year, then 20 years later, you will have 100,000 children entering college. Taiwan knows this problem starting from about 30 years ago. Last year, we have the lowest birth rate. And usually when we have situations like this, you have, on the overall totalitarian view, it's an aging society. You will have shortage of manpower. You will have shortage of younger generation supporting the older generation. So you would introduce immigration or foreign workers, or somehow using immigration to attract talents to supply what the society would need on the base level. Specifically on higher education, Taiwan simply opened up too many universities for too few children, even 20 years ago. So now you would have a very clear demographic trend of a clear oversupply and an oversupply of no return in terms of higher education capability. And the best solution, and in fact, one of the presidential candidates talked about it, the best solution is to open up for international students to come. But with an ideological block, the DPP government only wants students from Africa, from Southeast China, in other words, Southeast Asia, not Southeast China. They block students from China. And that reduced the level of talents coming into Taiwan's education system. And that would go into a downward spiral. It's a very bad scenario for Taiwan's higher education. And you can apply that to other places as well. See, when Freeman said the world is hot, flat, and crowded, he is talking about on a global level, we don't need this many people to produce this many goods to provide everyone. So it's crowded. Wherever you are, you always have competition from all over the world. And that's a macro view. But on the micro level, on market by market specific, country by country, some countries, some places have overcapacity, such as Taiwan, for higher education. So we need to open up for international influx of students in order to capitalize or maximize the benefit of such an overcapacity of education. Unfortunately, the DPP government doesn't present a hospitable environment. I think it's more than just opening up the policy to allow them to come, but you must make them feel welcome. It has to be hospitable, not hostile. Right now, with a hostile situation, with them arbitrarily arrest businessman Xiangxin, which is a real example. You make Taiwan a quote unquote not so safe place for mainland Chinese students. So even in the best scenario, when comes January, the Pan Blue wins the election, come May, they reopen up. I think the general social zeitgeist, the feeling of the field, the feeling of the society, takes some time to change, to make students coming into Taiwan feel they're comfortable, for travelers, tourists, feel that they are respected, welcomed, and loved. When I went to the United States as a graduate student, I went to a very warm America, which was 1980s. And I believe, Daxuan and Stephen's experience must be the same as mine. But if I were a young student today, thinking about going to the United States, especially if I'm a technology or advanced scientist, I may think again, because China become a threat or perceived threat to the United States, and the United States may perceive me personally as a potential threat. So I may think again. But when I went to my graduate alma mater, it was a very warm, welcoming United States, opening arms to educate talents from around the world, which is very different from today, at least from my observation.
Well, I think that we have reached that time now. Stephen, do you want to give a quick summary?
Why don't you do it?
Well, yeah, I listen to Joanne every time. And to be fascinated by her is always an understatement, because she always presented a point of a global, wide-angle point of view in her presentations on whatever subject that we are talking about. I think today she outlined some of the fundamental differences between the United States representing the Western world and China representing the Asian world. Political differences have consequences. And these are consequences that we are seeing today that's playing out, that's making the world divided deeper and deeper. But hopefully, it doesn't lead to the terrible word, the W word. And I hope everyone today will take that as the lesson and work within your community, either in the East or the West, to encourage that there should be peace on earth, not just in Israel, not just in Ukraine, but everywhere else, and also eliminate potential conflicts, as people seem to always talk about Asia, especially about the Taiwan Straits. So again, Joanne, I want to thank you for being a fantastic host today, not the host, a fantastic speaker today. And I think that we have gone a long way in trying to understand some of the issues, some of the challenges we are facing today. Thank you very much again. And I wish everyone, for me, is I wish everyone good night, or for you, is everyone good morning. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Victor.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Very good. Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Joanna.
Thank you. Bye.
Oh, by the way, before you sign off, this recording will be in YouTube very quickly. Please keep attention to that. Thank you. Bye-bye.
You.